In court, the boy who harassed my daughter said his father taught him everything. Everyone went silent until witnesses began standing up to expose the man behind it all. The restraining order was filed on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, the knock came, louder than necessary, but not aggressive, but staged to interrupt whatever calm we had managed to build inside our home. When I opened the door, 3 men stood shoulder to shoulder on my porch, all dressed in semi-formal attire, each holding a clipboard that was more for appearance than purpose. The one in the center introduced himself as Robert McKenzie, president of the school board. The name was familiar, distantly connected to local politics, known for his donations to educational grants and gala events, often mentioned in the same breath as Mark Morrison. "Mr. Thompson," he began, reading from what appeared to be a prepared statement. "We're here because concerns have been raised about your conduct as an educator. Specifically, there have been multiple reports suggesting you've been coaching your daughter to make false allegations against a classmate." I didn't say anything right away. I let them finish the entire monologue, every sentence weighted with insinuation, every phrase carefully chosen to sound both professional and subtly threatening. "We're not making any assumptions at this time," he continued, "but as a public school employee, your actions reflect on the district. Mr. Morrison has expressed a willingness to resolve the matter quietly, to avoid disruption. If the complaints are withdrawn," I stopped him there. The phone in my shirt pocket was already recording. Its lens, barely visible beneath the fabric, was pointed squarely at their faces. "Are you threatening my job because I'm protecting my daughter?" I asked, my voice even. Robert's face didn't change. He gave a tight smile and said, "No one's threatening anything. We're simply here to offer alternatives before this escalates further." They left soon after, walking in formation down the steps, their clipboards untouched, their words lingering like the residue of smoke. The moment the door clicked shut, I uploaded the recording directly to Catherine. Later that evening, Linda called from Sarah's apartment. Her voice was lower than usual, steadier in tone, but I could tell something was different. There was a shift. Not fear, exactly, but clarity. "He's getting reckless," she said. "He's been calling old contacts, trying to frame everything as a misunderstanding." I went into his office today and found the notebook. She meant the one she had mentioned before. The one where Mark kept records of his manipulation. Names, dates, leverage. She didn't take the notebook itself. That would have made him suspicious. But she photographed every page, one by one, and sent them to Catherine before dinner. The entries were detailed. Names of school officials, business owners, local council members. Next to each name were bullet points, favors granted, debts owed, pressure points exploited. One page listed a local police sergeant with the phrase "covered for Trent, 2016" written in tight script beneath it. Another named a school psychologist with a note that read, reminded him of adoption papers. Silent since. Catherine's response was immediate and direct. "This changes everything." She said it wasn't just about Amelia anymore. The notebook revealed a pattern, a calculated, long-term strategy of coercion, covered in layers of professional polish and legal insulation. It proved that Mark hadn't just enabled abuse, he had built an entire support system to protect himself from consequences. Over the next few days, we shifted into preparation mode. Catherine began organizing our evidence into formal exhibits. Sarah filed a detailed affidavit as both a social worker and a family witness. Linda updated her testimony and added annotations to her journals. Amelia, for her part, began practicing what to say on the stand. Catherine coached her to keep her answers factual, to describe the events clearly, without speculation or exaggeration. Amelia didn't cry, she didn't flinch, she just nodded after every instruction, like someone who had already replayed her trauma 100 times and had nothing left to fear from repeating it aloud. Meanwhile, Archer's behavior became increasingly erratic. One of his classmates forwarded us a video, recorded on a school security camera, of him placing handwritten notes in other students' lockers. The messages were unmistakable. "She's lying. She wants attention. Don't believe her." Catherine used the footage to push for a formal review of his conduct. The school, sensing liability, finally began to shift. The principal, who once told me my daughter was the problem, called me personally to apologize. He didn't say much, and most of it sounded rehearsed, but the fact that he called it all said enough. By the end of the week, Amelia had stopped asking if she was doing the right thing. She no longer questioned whether anyone would believe her. She just focused on the facts, on the details, on the sequence of what happened and how it happened. There was no script, just memory. We had one more night before the hearing. Amelia asked if she could sleep in my room, just for a while, like she used to when she was little and couldn't fall asleep during thunderstorms. I didn't ask why. I just moved the blanket over and let her rest. When the lights were off and the house was quiet, she said one thing: tomorrow. I want to look at him when I speak. I want him to know I'm not scared anymore. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. The courthouse sat on the edge of town, just past the old post office and across from a crumbling law library that had probably seen better decades. We arrived early, not because we had to, but because none of us could sit at home waiting. Catherine met us at the front entrance, carrying a hard-shell briefcase in one hand and her phone already in the other. She didn't waste time greeting us. She simply nodded once, then said, "Linda's inside. First bench. Left side. She's ready." The hearing room wasn't large, but it felt cavernous anyway. The fluorescent lights gave everything a washed-out quality, and the chairs, lined in dusty blue fabric, squeaked when anyone moved. But it was quiet. Everyone who had shown up seemed to understand the weight of what would unfold. Linda sat exactly where Catherine said she would. Her hands were folded in her lap, her posture straight but not rigid. Her gaze fixed on the double doors across the room where Mark would soon enter. When she saw Amelia, her eyes softened slightly, but she didn't speak. There was nothing left to explain between them. Mark arrived 10 minutes later, flanked by a sharply dressed attorney and a young assistant holding a tablet. His confidence was still intact. Polished shoes, tailored suit, even a pocket square folded into perfect geometry. But the moment he scanned the room and saw Linda seated beside our legal team, something in his expression flickered for surprise, maybe disbelief. Then came the flicker of recognition that he no longer controlled the narrative. The judge presiding over the hearing was Roberta O'Cathine, a woman known for her no-nonsense reputation and clean, blunt rulings. She entered without fanfare, took her seat behind the raised bench, and called the session to order with a clarity that cut through the tension in the room like a scalpel. Catherine presented first. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't dramatize. She walked through the evidence like a surgeon walking through an operating manual. One item at a time, photos of bruises, screenshots of messages, recordings of threats, transcripts of school board intimidation, the USB footage, Linda's journals, the spray paint incident, the tampered electrical outlet, the drive-by photos of Amelia's window. Each exhibit was labeled, dated, and referenced. When the video played of Mark demonstrating restraint techniques on Linda while instructing Archer, no one in the courtroom moved. The only sound was the low hum of the air vent near the ceiling. Catherine concluded her segment with the audio file of Archer near the water fountain. The one where he told Amelia that if she didn't smile when she saw him, I'd lose my job. After it finished, she looked directly at the judge and said, "This child has endured systematic harassment, institutional dismissal, and targeted retaliation. All of it orchestrated, explicitly or implicitly, by the man seated across this room." Then she rested her case. Amelia took the stand next. She didn't stumble. She didn't rush. She described, with surgical clarity, what had happened and when, how the name-calling started, how it escalated to touching, how her complaints were ignored, how she was made to apologize, how the detention was assigned, how the surveillance began, how she found the photo of her own window taken at night, with her shadow behind the curtain. She ended her testimony by pulling out her phone, opening the photo gallery, and showing the judge the message Archer had sent at 2:47 a.m., alongside the image of her room, Sweet Dreams. "Goldilocks. I'm watching. I haven't slept properly since," she said. Mark's attorney attempted to discredit her with questions that bordered on the theatrical. He suggested she had exaggerated, that she had misinterpreted the boy's behavior, that perhaps she had even encouraged detention. But Amelia didn't flinch. She answered each question like she was stating directions to a bus stop. Just the facts, just what happened. Then came the final blow. Archer was called to testify. He walked in slowly, wearing a suit that didn't quite fit and shoes that squeaked with every step. His father leaned over and whispered something before he sat down. Archer nodded. But once the questions began, something shifted. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was years of being told he could say anything and be believed. When asked why he followed Amelia, he smirked and said, "My dad says girls need to know their place." There was a collective intake of breath. She was being difficult, he continued. "So I had to show her who's in charge. That's what men do." "And who taught you that?" Catherine asked. "My dad, he replied without hesitation. "He showed me with Mom. He says once they're scared enough, they'll do whatever you want." Before anyone could respond, Mark lunged forward and grabbed Archer's arm hard enough to make him wince. "Shut your mouth," he hissed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Two bailiffs moved instantly. The one restrained Mark, the other ushered Archer away, but the damage was already done. He had just assaulted his son in open court, in front of a judge, in the middle of a hearing. Judge O'Cathine called for a recess, her expression unreadable. But when we returned 15 minutes later, her ruling was immediate and precise. Permanent restraining orders were granted against both Mark and Archer. No contact with Amelia or me, direct or indirect, is permitted under any circumstances. Archer was ordered to undergo mandatory psychological treatment with court monitoring and monthly reporting. But the judge wasn't finished. "Mr. Morrison," she said, her voice steely, "your behavior in this courtroom, combined with the overwhelming evidence presented today, leads me to refer this case to the district attorney for criminal investigation. Charges may include, but are not limited to, witness intimidation, child endangerment, assault, and conspiracy to commit harassment." Mark's attorney tried to object. The judge silenced him with a look. "I am also forwarding this case to the school board," she added, along with a recommendation that Mr. Morrison's position be terminated immediately. As we left the courtroom, Linda approached us in the hallway. She looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath her eyes, posture slumped. But there was something else there too, a quiet lightness, something close to relief. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for believing, for not backing down. I didn't think anyone ever would." A woman in a dark blazer, her divorce attorney, was waiting by the elevator. With a restraining order on file and Mark's outburst captured in the transcript, Linda filed for emergency custody and began divorce proceedings that afternoon. In the weeks that followed the hearing, things didn't return to normal, because there had never really been a normal to return to. But something did begin to shift, a kind of quiet ripple, like the sound that comes after a large weight has finally been dropped into still water. Mark Morrison was arrested 3 days after Judge O'Cathien referred the case to the district attorney. The charges were extensive: assault, witness intimidation, conspiracy, unlawful surveillance, child endangerment, and obstruction. Catherine told me that the number of counts would likely grow as additional evidence from Linda's USB and journals was parsed and verified. His bail was set deliberately high, citing not just the risk of flight, but also the clear pattern of retaliation and influence over others. Meanwhile, the school board found itself thrust into the spotlight. A local journalist, one of the parents who had quietly sat in the back of the courtroom, published a comprehensive report detailing the events of the past year. She had requested access to public records, compiled anonymous statements, and traced Mark's fingerprints across years of institutional cover-ups. Once the story reached the community, more families began to come forward. Some brought printed emails, others brought screenshots. A few brought nothing but their stories. Quiet, broken recollections of how their children had been bullied and then blamed. One woman shared how her daughter had tried to switch schools after reporting inappropriate comments from a student connected to Mark's son. Another described how her child was told to stop exaggerating after reporting locker room harassment. Every story, though unique in details, followed the same Mark report: dismiss, punish. Catherine took their testimonies and began to build what she called a coordinated response. She filed a civil suit on behalf of 5 families, including mine, citing emotional damages, administrative negligence, and failure to protect minors from targeted abuse. The school district, likely sensing the tidal wave approaching, convened an emergency meeting. This time, but they didn't hide behind polite silence. Mark's employment was terminated unanimously. His keycard access was revoked. His photos were taken down from the district's recognition wall. Officially, they cited a breach of conduct incompatible with the ethical standards of the board. Unofficially, they were trying to contain the damage before it spread further. The principal who once dismissed Amelia's injuries as overreaction was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Ms. Peterson, the teacher who had laughed when I first raised concerns, resigned the following week. Whether by pressure or shame, I didn't know. And to be honest, I didn't care. New policies were announced within a month. Anti-bullying protocols with mandatory reporting, digital surveillance rules tied to local law enforcement, anonymous complaint systems for students. There were seminars, training sessions, assemblies. And while I understood that change in policy couldn't undo what had already been allowed, I also knew that someone in the building, somewhere, was watching now. Archer, meanwhile, was sent to a therapeutic boarding school out of state, specializing in behavioral intervention for adolescents with violent or manipulative tendencies. The court ordered weekly sessions with a licensed psychologist and mandated monthly reports to monitor his progress. I was told, through Catherine, that his therapist, Dr. Kathy Tubert, believed his worldview had been warped from an early age by an environment that rewarded domination and frame control as affection. She said it would take years to unlearn what had been modeled for him. And even then, there were no guarantees. As for Linda, her divorce moved forward without resistance. With the combination of police reports, journal entries, court testimony, and Mark's outburst in front of a judge, she was granted full custody. Mark was permitted supervised visits only. Though in the first month, Archer refused to attend any of them, Linda stayed with Sarah for a while, then moved into a small house on the other side of town, far from the district where she had spent 20 years pretending everything was fine. We didn't see her much after that, not because of distance, but because she needed space to rebuild something of her own, something that wasn't shaped around Mark's moods or threats. When we did run into her at the grocery store one morning, she smiled, genuinely, and told Amelia that she had just started painting again. The criminal trial was set 6 months out. Catherine said it would be long and grueling, but the evidence was strong and the witnesses resolute. Mark's attempts to control the narrative from jail, through calls, letters, and third parties, only added to the charges. A few of his former allies began to distance themselves publicly, issuing statements of deep concern and renewed commitment to student welfare. Some of the very people who had once stood on my porch and implied my career was at risk were now scrambling to rewrite their own involvement. I kept everything, every message, every document, every file, not out of paranoia, but because this time I wanted a record no one could bury. One night, I found Amelia sitting at the dining table alone, her sketchbook open in front of her. She wasn't drawing. She was just flipping through old pages. Doodles from last year. Character designs she once dreamed would become stories. Little panels filled with color and noise. I sat across from her and waited. After a long moment, she looked up and asked, "Do you think he knew he'd lose?" I asked her what she meant. Mark, Archer. Do you think they actually thought it would end differently? I didn't have an answer. I didn't think she expected one. She closed the sketchbook and whispered, "I'm glad I wasn't alone. That was enough." In the weeks following the courtroom's ruling, there was a strange kind of stillness that settled into our home. Not silence, exactly, but the absence of that constant anticipation I had grown used to. I no longer listened for the phone to ring late at night or check the driveway for nails before backing out each morning. The air felt different in even the smallest routines, brushing teeth, boiling water for tea, folding laundry, carried a strange clarity, like we were slowly learning how to live without bracing for impact. Amelia, for her part, began filling in the blank spaces. She rejoined her online art group. She started waking up early again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to finish a digital illustration before breakfast. Her sketchbook lived on the kitchen counter now, no longer hidden beneath her mattress or tucked behind textbooks. One evening, she handed me a drawing. A girl standing on a rooftop, hair tangled in the wind, holding a flashlight that cut across the night sky. It wasn't signed. She didn't need to explain what it meant. School was no longer a looming shadow. We had officially registered for long-term homeschooling with the district's virtual learning platform. And while the system wasn't perfect, it gave her space to breathe. Occasionally, a counselor from the board would check in, more out of protocol than concern, but Amelia handled those calls herself. She kept her answers factual, polite, and brief. She no longer looked for permission to speak. Catherine continued coordinating with the district attorney's office, preparing witness schedules and responding to motions from Mark's legal team. He had switched attorneys twice in 1 month, both citing philosophical differences. By the time his third attorney entered the picture, the case file had grown to over 600 pages. Catherine kept a digital copy on an encrypted drive and a printed version locked in her office safe. Sarah remained involved as well, not just with Linda, but with several other families who had come forward after the article ran. She helped them navigate the process of filing complaints, collecting documentation, and understanding their rights. She told me once, over coffee, that it was the first time in 15 years she'd seen this many people willing to speak at once. Abuse thrives in silence, she said. It doesn't survive confrontation. The community response shifted too. At first, people were hesitant. Neighbors who had waved every morning suddenly unsure of what to say, unsure of whether to offer sympathy or distance. But slowly, that changed. One mother from Amelia's old class dropped off a box of baked cookies with a handwritten note. "I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry." A retired teacher from the district mailed a letter apologizing for not questioning the culture of boys will be boys. The letter was 2 pages long and folded with care. Not everyone changed, of course. There were still glances in grocery store aisles, whispered comments just loud enough to hear. Some people didn't want to believe what Mark had done. Some refused to believe that children's, especially their children, were capable of the harm mine had endured. But by then, those reactions no longer carried the weight they once did. The evidence had already spoken. The court had already ruled. The truth didn't need anyone's permission to remain true. Linda continued moving forward. Her divorce was finalized, custody granted in full, and she began attending weekly counseling sessions. Privately, quietly, with no intention of discussing it beyond her own boundaries. Amelia and I saw her only once, after the court date, at a small community bookstore where she was picking up a journal. We talked for no more than 5 minutes. But before we left, she reached out and gently placed her hand on Amelia's shoulder. "You were never the problem," she said. "Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise." Amelia didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. That was enough. The last time I heard Mark's name, it came from Catherine during a case update. He had attempted to send a letter to Archer through a mutual acquaintance. Against the terms of his no-contact order, the violation was reported, documented, and added to the growing list of charges. His trial date remained firm, and Catherine expected a plea bargain might come, but she warned me not to count on it. Men like Mark rarely accepted accountability without a fight, but that was no longer my fight. My focus had shifted. I spent my mornings with Amelia now, not because she needed supervision, but because I wanted to understand the world she was rebuilding. She showed me new illustration techniques. She shared music she liked. We started taking walks in the evenings again, something we hadn't done in almost a year. Sometimes we talked. Other times we just walked in silence, both of us letting the quiet do its work. One evening, as we passed the small park near the elementary school, Amelia stopped by a rusted bench and traced her finger over the initials carved into the wood. I waited, thinking she might say something. She didn't. Instead, she turned to me and said, "Can we go home now?" Not because she was scared, but because she finally had a home again. Justice, as it turns out, isn't a clean ending. It doesn't tie everything up or fix the parts of you that were bent out of shape trying to survive. What it does, if you're lucky, is make space, not closure, not healing overnight, but space, room to breathe, to rebuild, to decide what happens next without someone else's grip steering the wheel. When Mark's criminal trial finally opened, we didn't attend the first day. Catherine had warned us that his legal team would attempt to challenge the validity of the recordings and paint Amelia as unstable, driven by manipulation or attention-seeking. It was a strategy we had seen before, just dressed in courtroom language. Instead, we followed from a distance. Catherine kept us updated with precision. Sarah testified. Linda read from her journals. A digital forensics expert confirmed the authenticity of every file we submitted. Slowly, piece by piece, same story emerged again, but this time under oath, before a jury. Midway through the second week, the prosecution introduced the notebook. It was one thing to accuse a man of calculated abuse. It was another to show a handwritten record of that abuse maintained over 2 decades. Page after page of names, threats, favors, and strategies. There were diagrams, cross-referenced relationships, lists of people who owed him, instructions on how to counter complaints with preemptive rumors, techniques for discrediting parents who got too involved. It didn't matter how polished his suit was or how skilled his new attorney sounded. No one in that courtroom could explain away what was written in Mark Morrison's own handwriting. By the 3rd week, his defense team began to fracture. 2 of his prior school board colleagues gave statements distancing themselves. A police officer previously named in the notebook resigned quietly, citing personal reasons. The momentum shifted. Mark's confidence, once absolute, began to erode. In the end, he accepted a deal guilty on multiple counts in exchange for a shorter trial and a reduced sentence, but one that still included prison time, restitution to families involved, and the forfeiture of all roles in educational and civic organizations. It wasn't as long as some might have hoped, but it was official, permanent, and undeniable. When the verdict was read, Amelia and I were at home. I didn't tell her immediately. She was on the back porch, painting. I waited until she was finished, then walked out with 2 mugs of tea and sat beside her. The sun was low, coloring the sky in streaks of faded orange. "It's over," I said. She didn't ask what I meant. She already knew. That night, she deleted the folder on her phone. The one where she had saved the screenshots, the notes, the messages. She didn't ask for help. She didn't make a ceremony out of it. She just tapped, held, curious, and cleared the memory. I made backup copies months ago, so nothing was lost. But for her, it wasn't about preservation anymore. It was about release. The weeks that followed were quiet. There were no more midnight knocks, no more anonymous notes slipped into our mailbox, no more tire punctures or dead phone lines. We lived, slowly, without headlines or whispers. Amelia began volunteering at a local library's art club for younger kids. At first, she just helped organize supplies, but within a month, she was leading workshops. She never talked about what happened. She didn't introduce herself as a survivor. She just taught kids how to blend pastels, how to shade skin tones, how to tell a story through color. Watching her with them, I realized something: the power they tried to strip from her had never really been taken. It had just been hidden under fear, waiting for space to stretch. I returned to teaching in the spring. It wasn't the same school. It wasn't even the same district. I transferred quietly, with Catherine's help and a few letters of support from former colleagues. At first, I wasn't sure if I was ready to be in a classroom again, to hear lockers slam or watch hallway dynamics play out. But something about standing in front of students reminded me why I fought so hard in the first place. It had never just been about Amelia. It had been about the silence that swallows voices like hers every day. People still ask, sometimes, whether I've forgiven him. Mark, I don't have an answer that fits neatly into words. Forgiveness implies resolution, a kind of moral release. What I feel is simpler. I don't think about him anymore. I don't wonder where he is. I don't imagine what he's doing. He exists now only as a fact, a finished chapter in a story I never wanted to write, but refused to let someone else end. One evening, about 6 months after the trial, Amelia and I walked past the school she once attended. The building was the same. The windows still carried the faint smudges of too many fingerprints, but the people inside were different. New principal, new board, new policies. We didn't stop. We just kept walking. And for the first time in a very long time, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt like something else. It felt like freedom.